Welcome to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Levere, and join me as we talk to other knife makers and craftsmen about anything and everything knives. Thank you for listening in again to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Levere, and I am joined by my friend and fellow knife colleague, Gary Langley. I wanted to have Gary on the podcast to really just kind of pick apart what got him into knives and everything, to introduce him to the public at large. And it's really because you have probably seen Gary. You've probably experienced him doing work inside of the knife community, but he is what I would probably consider one of the unsung heroes of our industry, in the sense that he's there. He's very knowledgeable. He works in the background with with a lot of different avenues and knives, and he's the vice president of the Knifemakers Guild. But he also is not a self-promoter in a lot of ways. He does his thing, and I think that a lot of people would benefit greatly from being able to get a better idea of who Gary is, and talk through some of his knife philosophy. So, Gary, it is an extreme pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. Always enjoy visiting with you.
Yeah, I was my wife Elizabeth loves you. She's like she said that you remind her of her dad, and you're always upbeat and very respectful, but jovial and considerate towards everybody. And I do have to say, like, when I was thinking about what I'll name your episode, it would be everyone's dad, right, or everyone's father. And the reason why I don't know, you have that vibe about you that's just like, when I go to you, I expect that you're going to have your own opinion about everything, but I respect that. And you're also going to be considerate about, the context at which I ask you questions or seek advice, and also know that you're going to be thoughtful about the way that you interpret what I need out of it. And so, my family loves you, and I hope that the community at large always looks at you and appreciates your work. So,
yeah. Well, thank you very much.
The first question I really want to ask you is, I know more about your knife career than I do about your life outside of knives. And so I'd really like to start talking more about that. Like what, I know that you're retired, but what did you do before retirement? I want to talk a little bit about your photography, you and Debbie's photography, and what you do with that. And then we'll get into some more about knives as we go along. So, how'd you grow up? What got you working in the area that you did? And what does retirement look like? Stuff like that.
Well, basically, I've just always been lucky. I, Me and Deb got married, and we built our first house. And the guy across the street worked with my dad, and he introduced me to custom knives. His name was Don Dollar, and he showed me a copy of what used to be the American Blade magazine and the Knifemakers Guild, and showed me what fit and finish was. And uh, my dad had built a few knives, and they were real crude. I mean, they were a cross between a knife and an axe, I guess you would say. But I met Don, and he got me started on that. And it's just, prior to that, I'd always had knives. I mean, my granddad gave me knives when I was 5 or 6 years old. He'd buy those 10 for $1 knives, and every time he'd see me, he'd give me another one, and that's about how long it'd be before I lose it. So I just grew up with them, playing mumbly peg, and uh, I took my pocket knife and whittled knives out of wood. So it's just always been something I've done.
So you and Deb got married, but talk to me a little bit about what you did for work um, previous to like retirement and everything?
Well, uh, I worked at the refinery. My dad had worked at the refinery for Diamond Shamrock, and then I think in '79 he died from asbestos cancer, and I got on out there, and I ended up working in the lab, and I did a lot of different jobs off and on over the years. Uh, Basically, we made gasoline, and if you've ever seen 1 gallon of gasoline, you've seen them all. They're just, it's definitely not much craftsmanship or one-on-one. It's just, you're making 100,000 barrels of gasoline at a time. And we worked in the lab, and our main job was to uh, quality control just to confirm that it would burn. And I did everything from run acid, asphalt to propane and butanes and gasolines and ethanol and just, over 25 years in the lab, uh, I pretty much covered every corner of it at one time or another, and made knives off and on all those years. And I have a son and a daughter, and I took off quite a few years there, fishing and t-balling and doing all the things you need to do with your kids. And I think when I retired in 2013. I'd built 200 knives since '77, and since 13, when I retired, I built another 450 or so. So uh, the bulk of my knife making has been since I retired.
So, working in the lab and everything, was there any type of credentials that you had to have for that, or any education, or did you just were you just able to hop into that when you decided to work in the refinery?
You know, our particular refinery was a union, and it's basically with seniority. You had time to bid on a job, and you got the job, and then once you got inside a department where you had to know this job, and then you could get set up on vacations on a higher paying job, and then you would learn that, and then as bids opened up, you would move on up the ladder, and there wasn't any kind of a college diploma or anything like that you had to have. Uh, it was just, kind of a get her done situation, and work shift work, lots of evenings and midnights, and that was one of the things that held me back from joining the Knifemakers Guild early on back in the '80s and '90s, was that I only had one weekend a month off, and I couldn't attend shows and stuff. So uh, it was a good job. Spent 34 years at it, but I've never looked back. So glad to be gone. So
I think that probably most of us agree that day jobs suck,
yeah,
but not everybody can live in retirement, for their entire career. It's interesting to me, the the concept of vocational work, because I'm really big on that. Like I didn't grow up with this concept of, you go through school, then you get to college or university, you get a degree, and that's when you start working at whatever it is you think you want to do. I was homeschooled, and my parents pretty much instilled in me that, if you can find work, just work. There's no glamour in working, because generally you're not doing what you want to do, or your hobbies or things. So
yeah,
I've always appreciated like Votech type of schools, and this concept of like micro, what he's doing with trades jobs, because they're everywhere and they need to be filled, and you need to have people who are good at being able to be educated into them. But if
mhm,
you try to tell somebody with a degree that they are going to sit in a laboratory and burn fuel and whatnot, they're going to say, "Well, my education makes it so I don't have to do that." But then you have a generation or more that have no jobs because they don't do what they think that they want to do based on all this money that they paid.
yeah. I was in a situation a lot of times where, I had 20 years seniority in the lab and had been through a lot of the equipment, and they would hire. someone in off the street that had a degree and bring them in, and they were actually be my boss, and I would have to train them. Uh, and they had the degree and they knew a lot of things I didn't know, but they did not know the job. And so, yeah, I did a lot of that.
Yeah, we encounter that a lot in knives, though, too. Like some of the newer knife makers that come into the industry, like they have some real incredible skills, like natural aptitude to learn knives. But there are lots of like fundamentals and tricks and things that we learn over time, a lot of trial and error that they don't necessarily have. And so even though they can get like the profiling down and grinding down and everything like that, there are sometimes like nuances to knife making that they don't get. And so it's like it's up to the old guard to try to tweak that skill set to get them to where they're making top notch blades.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is a great time to be coming into knife making and learning it. When I started, I think I built my first one in '77. And like I said, we had a American Blade magazine that came out once a month. And Bob Scrimshire had a catalog. You sent off $2 and got a catalog. And then you waited on the catalog to come in. And then you would make an order out and go down and get a money order and ship it to him. And, 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, you'd have your stuff. And now, you can just get on there and order it online and have it in maybe 3 days. Uh, One of the first knife makers I met down in San Antonio, I was showing him one of my knives, and he looked at me and he said, "Well, how many have you made?" And I said, "Well, this is my second one." And he said, "Well, you should have had it figured out by now," and just turned around and walked away from me. And I thought, wow, these guys are tough. And I don't know why, but they didn't want to really share knowledge back then. And I went on around that same knife show for a couple of hours, and I met LC Finger. And so I thought, well, I'm going to ask him. And so I started talking to him about it. And he was like, "Hey, man, come around here and pull up a chair." And he had me come around behind his table, started giving me catalogs, gave me handle material, uh, just everything he could do to help get me going. And then he used to come to Amarillo to the gun shows, and he would remember me. And he was just a big help. But yeah, it seems like now the information is so much freer, and which is great. It's uh, I decided way back then I was going to be like LC. I wasn't going to be like the other guys, and I don't have any secrets. I'm happy to tell anybody anything, and you know, I never trained with anybody. I've been in a couple of other maker shops, but it was more just to visit, 15, 20 minutes here or there. Never had anybody show me how to grind a blade or anything like that. I uh, just pretty much self-taught. I listened to anybody that would tell me what to do, but I don't never had a class or anything like that. So
Yeah, well, that's something I've observed over the years of knowing you is that you're constantly seeking information on how to do things. Like even if it's just in a particular Facebook group, or if we're at a show or something like that. When we're in a group and we're talking about something, if you have a question, you'll pipe up and say, "Hey," and ask somebody who's a subject matter expert to explain those things to you. And I've always appreciated that because I don't think that there's a stopping point on education, especially self education. And so, like, I think that it benefits everybody to always be seeking more knowledge and other ways to do things, and then try to figure out the best way to augment your own knife making style and processes according to what works best at the time that you're able to, I guess, figure things out or to ask people, if all that makes sense.
yeah, yeah, I never miss an opportunity to sit and visit with anybody. There's hardly anybody that you can't learn something from. Uh, we had that, I think it was last year at the Texas show when we were doing the inspections, and Stanley Music was helping us do the inspections. And we had a lull there about 30 minutes where we didn't have anybody. And I just said, Stanley, this is what is just kicking my rear. And he looked at me and he said, I can tell you exactly what you're doing. And I said, please. And he sat down and explained to me what I'm doing. And I would just sit there and listen to him. And I mean, he must have talked for 15, 20 minutes. And, uh, I was writing everything down in my mind. And I come home and tried everything he told me. And, I called him back later and I said, man, thanks. I said, you fixed it. You fixed my problem. And so, yeah. And, Stanley's great. I mean, he was just free with the information and proud to be able to help me. So, uh, yeah, I really admire people like that. That's what I strive to do.
Yeah. And that's I mean, I really agree with that sentiment because that's some of the things that I've encountered being a knife maker after the internet is that there's a lot of information out there, and it's really difficult to decide on what is factual is the wrong word, but what's effective because everybody has their opinion and everybody has the ability to make a quick video and post it on YouTube or social media in some other way. And a lot of what you see out there is not always the most efficient way to do things, but if somebody's figured it out, they decide that their knowledge is valuable and they share it, and then you have to be the one to be discerning and sift through it to make sure that it's applicable to you. Whereas, if you're talking one-on-one with a knife maker and you say, I have this specific problem, then a knife maker who's encountered that or is helpful will either help you think through it, or they know what the derivative of what you're asking is, and they know how to solve for that in their specific way. But that's something that I've had a hard time with, is just there's so much information. How do I find what's actually helpful to me based on the way that I think, based on my shop equipment and everything like that? Then there's still probably about 25 or 30% of knife operations that I have to figure out wholly by myself, even from an equipment and machining and process perspective, because my equipment in my shop is, for as much as it is like other knife makers, does have tools that are just specific to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Every maker has his own little, the way he does stuff. And like me, I mean, I've had people come to my shop and I've showed them how to do something. And then 6 weeks or a month, 2 months later, they come back and I'm doing that same thing. And they said, that's not what you showed me. And I said, well, that's not what I do now. I do this. I figured this out. And it's just a total, constant evolution. And I think a lot of makers are that way. And sometimes I think that's why it's not necessarily bad information, but uh, they tell people do it this way, and then 6 months later they figured out a better way, and it keeps changing. Uh,
Yeah. Do you think that anything about your photography or your eye for symmetry and balance and things like that play a role in how you actually make your knives?
oh, I think a knife ought to have a flow to it, nice smooth lines. I get a lot of comments that my knives are clean. There's no rough lines in it and everything. And I think maybe that's a little bit of what it is, and have the eye for photography. Composition wise, it's kind of like composition of your knife, I guess you could say. Uh, and the eye for detail. Being able to do that last 10% that makes the knife truly a custom handmade knife. Uh,
Yeah. Something that I've I've tried to talk to other knife makers about is like that concept of the last 10%, whether it's whatever percentage it is that gets it to the finish line, right? It's kind of like this. The difference between you and me as makers when it comes to the knife itself, like the profiling and everything like that, is really only functionally a few hundred thousandths, right? It's not a lot, but that 10% makes up like 90% of what that knife actually turns into. Like like what the aesthetic choices that you make on your pin placement and your handle material and your finish and your geometry, everything from the cutting edge to the feel to the sheaths, how you present it to your market and everything. That 10% makes up 90% of what that knife actually is. And unlike like we learn the like the 90% of knife making through talking with makers and self-discovery and online resources or literature, things like that. But that last 10% you really can't teach, because that's where your soul goes into things and your mind goes into things. So it's always been interesting for me to try to delve into the philosophy of the last 10%, because you can go down a rabbit hole pretty quickly on how you philosophize about knives and what it is that imparts the maker into that steel.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the things Don Dollar taught me early on. He told me the last 10% is 90% of the build. And that's something that's always stuck in my head. And, I've tried to tell people that. I have them come up to me and ask me what I think of their knife or something. And, I usually tell them as politely as I can, this is very nice, but you need to finish it. Uh, you just need to do that last 10%. And that's what sets it apart. Easier said than done, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a good point, because I had a hard time wrapping my head around that. Like I think the first time I really challenged myself to reach out to other makers and to get real advice was when I was going through the inspection process for the Texas Guild and then into the Knifemakers Guild. And when everybody was talking about the last 10% and fit and finish and everything, there were definitely some elements of my knives that I was already applying that 10% concept to, but there were others that I was lacking on it. Like I didn't, my bevels were geometrically all right. They were within a certain tolerance, but when I was sharpening my blade, you could tell that the grinds were a little bit off. You could tell on the plunge lines that they were a little bit off. The handle finish was a little bit off. And there were all things like I focused on when I was starting to make knives and learn that I got really good at, like doing bolsters and hiding pins and things, because I really liked the look of bolsters. But that was something, and it's kind of like advice for people who are listening, that the fundamentals of a knife, profile, handles, bolsters, whatever embellishments you're putting on things, they all have to be executed to a degree, right? But what you put in from yourself is like when you close your eyes, what does that knife look like to you? Like, do you have an idea of what that knife is supposed to look like before you start touching it, or after you've ground it, or once the handles are on it and you're doing your finishing work? And like at what stage do you actually start applying yourself, and what in your mind's eye is that knife? And to me, man, that was like, it was hard, because I don't think I found myself until I really started focusing on that last little bit of what it was that I was looking for. But now, practicing it, when I'm in the shop and when I'm making a knife, that 10%, overshadows the fundamentals of knife making. Now I'm like, okay, well, I want to have these bolsters look this certain way, or I want this handle to look a certain way and for it to flow a certain way. And so I start from, soup to nuts now about what it is that I want to accomplish with that piece, instead of getting down to the last 10% and trying to figure out the knife all over again.
Yeah, it's hard to sometimes you just want to be done with it, and you just have to make yourself say, I put on the optivisor and I walk over in the bright sun and I scrutinize it from top to bottom and I say, oh, I got to fix this. And I go back, I fix that. And I go back to the sunlight and I look at it again and I find a place. And invariably, I'll sell the knife and I'll be cleaning it up, fixing to ship it. And I'll say, oh man, I didn't see that. So I'm going back out to the shop. And, I don't know that it ever ends. You just keep being willing to fix it, you know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. It is a hard life, because we force ourselves to do this thing, and to scrutinize ourselves and to take public ridicule and judgment and everything over this thing that's like an intimate creation of ours. It's like it's like giving birth to a baby and then allowing the entire world to tell you it's ugly, and there's only so much you can do to make it not ugly.
Yeah.
And we do it 100% to ourselves. It's like it's self-induced stress.
Yeah, it doesn't get faster. I mean, you don't get faster the longer you build knives and the more knives you build. I think you get slower because you get pickier. It takes longer to get that stuff, and you become more critical. And after I joined the guild, well, I was so scared that I was going to turn out something that another guild member was going to see and say, "Oh, wait, man, this guy didn't fix it," And you can literally drive yourself crazy. Uh, so you strive for perfection, but you don't expect it, and trying to keep that balance uh, can be difficult sometimes.
Yeah, I would say I have the same kind of problem. I mean, it's I think that it's important to recognize as a maker that nothing is ever going to be perfect, and that the longer you think about a problem, sometimes the more of a rabbit hole it can get you down. But so last episode, I was
Yeah.
talking with Spencer Applin, and it made me think more about the fact that there is a paradigm shift when you're making knives. You make them and they just take the time that they take, right? And once you get to the point where you know that your processes just take that amount of time, you've reached a certain level, right? And if you want to make strides to reduce the time, you have to figure out a way to short circuit that, and that's usually in the arena of tooling or processes that shave off minutes or hours, right? So, if you want to be able to have a certain type of
Hmm.
finish, a perfect example is going from the belt when you're grinding your bevels and everything to hand sanding. Like anybody I know pretty much hates hand sanding because of how long it takes, and it's just there sitting in, obsessing over this scratch or that scratch or whatever. But the short circuit is to find a way to handle 90-95% of that on your bevel grinding, and then make your life easier on the
Hmm.
hand sanding by controlling as much of that reduction in scratches on the belt with the power tool, and then you have to spend less time hand sanding. And I found that very valuable. So I might take a blade up to 800 or 800 1200 grit on the grinder itself, and then I might spend 15 or 20 minutes hand sanding. But at that point, I'm really just trying to perfect the scratch patterns and things more so than worrying so much about deep low grit scratches. And so I've been able to save between 30 minutes and 2 hours, depending how lazy I want to be on the belt grinder. I've been able to save a ton of time, getting to the same objective as I just couldn't do before because I wasn't thinking about the tools doing the work for me correctly.
I don't hand sand. I know that's crazy to most knife makers, but I don't do it. I don't, my hand sanding on a knife, uh, if I've got bolsters on it, is zero. Uh, the only hand sanding I actually do will be like on a fighter where I've got the face of that guard and I solder it and I have to clean that solder up and there's just no way to do it and I'll hand sand that. But I just don't hand sand and I never really have. And recently I've started uh, doing a 2000 grit hand sand on some slip joints. But I just basically take them to a mirror and then I bring a 2000 grit back over them. It takes 5 minutes, but uh, yeah, if I had to spend 2 hours hand sanding on a knife, I'd just quit making them. I can't do it.
Well, I think most people would agree. So that's interesting to me because I would say that your style of knives pulls from the era in which you like the formative years of your knife
Mhm.
making, right? And so I see a lot of like Loveless
Right.
influence and whatnot, and a lot of those guys would do mirror polishes on their blades, and that can be done on the grinder pretty effectively, that and the
Right.
buffer. So do you want to describe a little bit about like kind of what your process is from once the profile is done to like grinding and
Well, I
everything?
usually grind my blades up. I usually grind the pre-grind with like an 80 grit. After I've heat treated, I'll do 120. Then I'll do 320 with the Trizac belts, and then I'll do the 600 Trizac, and then I'll go to the cork belt. I've got sometimes I use a 600 grit cork belt with black compound, and then I'll go to 1,000 grit with a green compound, and then I've recently got a 1,200 grit, and I use a white compound on it. And usually when I come off of that, and then I go back to my buffer, have a buffers. My buffers run 3,600 RPM, and I use the white. And I bought some of those. Pop sells some buffing wheels that are just really stiff, and they don't grab. I mean, don't get me wrong, they can grab a knife, but it's not real easy to grab like some of those floppy ones running slow do. And you run them high speed and you buff with that green and then you buff with the white. And, it just keep, you know, you buff it with the white and then you take it and get some good light and look at it, find some scratches and decide what you got to do. Maybe you need to go back to the 1,000 grit or whatever you need to go do to go back and get them. And you just keep going back and forth till you get them out. And
Yeah, that makes sense. And something that I've noticed observationally, when some knife makers will use the buffer to smooth over rough edges, for lack of a better term, typically you see that sharp lines are then they're not so sharp, like they're rounded over and everything. And something that I've always appreciated about the way that
mhm.
you address your process for zero hand sanding and doing mirror polishes and whatnot is that you still have really good definition of lines, like especially on your fighters, but on all of your knives, like you can tell that there is geometry that has flats to it. And saying that you don't hand sand in order to establish those, and that you do it all in the grinder and everything, I would say that people should look at your process and figure out how to do that, because there's a lot of really great flat lines, even though flat surfaces, even though you're doing that primarily all on the grinder and using a buffer and
Mhm.
everything.
Yeah, on the fighters, I think one of the keys on it is I use on some of the smaller fighters, I use a 3-inch wheel, and I cut my hologrinds in with that, and that gives you great definition. Some of the bigger fighters, I have to use a 5-inch because you can get paper thin edge if you're not careful. But a lot of what I do on the fighters, Steve Johnson had the DVD I bought, and I watched his video on that, and that's a whole lot of what I just told you how I finish my knives is what Steve does. And so I have had a few correspondence back and forth with him on the cork belts and stuff. And uh, I tried the foam wheels, uh, you know, and they work. The foam wheels work, but you have to go out and buy a 3-inch foam wheel and a 5-inch foam wheel. Those things. It's just it gets crazy expensive to do all that. So uh, I just went with the cork belts, and I think that those wheels give you more of that definition. And by using the same wheel, and the cork belts are the same thickness as a Trizac belt, so you're filling your hollow grind, and I think that helps keep everything sharp. And the buffing, I mean, you're coming off 1,000 grit. It's not like you're using the old Brown Ales buffing compound that those sparks, you know, 320
Yeah.
grit or something like that buffing compound. Uh, you know, uh, so I think that's what helps keep the definition, the small wheel, and then by going to the 1,000 grit cork and 1,200 grit cork.
Yeah. Well, and something, I forget who told it to me, but like satin finishes, like high satin finishes, seem to be a lot of the trend today. Like the high gloss is definitely like the old guard of making knives, and it seems like some of these. I think it has a lot to do with the brute to forge or forge to finish knife type of look, but they want to see some type of patterning or some type of texture of swords, and so on stock removal knives, especially when you're doing a really clean hand pulled finish, that's where a lot of people like want it. If they talk about satin, it's a hand pulled finish, and like all the lines are straight. But what I learned is that a really well structured hand rubbed finish starts with at the very least a poorly executed high polish finish,
Yeah,
right? Because the base of your satin should be the gloss or the high polish, and then when you're establishing those lines, they're cutting in to that high gloss and establishing the line geometry that you need to really make a very well defined satin.
yeah. The satin, yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, if you can do mirror polish and then come back and run that 2,000 grit over it, man, I think it looks great. Uh, and 2,000 grit's not going to destroy your lines. Yeah, I mean, you're not rubbing it that much. But yeah, it's always interesting to me. I've had people tell me that, the mirror finish scratches easier. And I said, how does that happen? And they said, well, it scratches easier. I said, well, they're both Rockwell 60, and I don't understand how they could scratch easier. And I've never had anybody fully explain to me that it does. But I think Lovelace said that the mirror polish was your best corrosion resistance, and that's the main reason I think they did the mirror polish was because it was you know those scratches just lend themselves to a place to collect moisture and stuff, and so I do a few. I do a few, and I started doing it on the slip joints simply because it seems like that's what the slip joint crowd expects is the hand rub finish, and they look great. I mean, if you've ever looked at Edmund Davidson's hand rub finishes, oh my gosh, those things are just it's just incredible. And but Edmund likes to hand sand. He spends a lot of time doing it. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it is a difference because, I mean, stainless material being readily available now is not the same way it was when, the majority was, poorly alloyed stainless or high carbon. Like those were options. It's like high carbon or tool steel or poorly formulated stainless. And what I mean by poorly formulated is just that they were not as corrosion resistant stainless alloys as they are today. It's gotten bananas on the metallurgy component of just how refined that stainless is, and the elements that they can put in order to make them still viable options for knife makers, with the edge retention and toughness and everything like that, but still have that high rate of corrosion resistance. Because, like in a hand rubbed or hand pulled finish, all you're doing in creating the line structure and everything is creating more surface area for moisture, which you're exactly correct. So a high gloss would reduce those scratches down to maybe where some water droplets could actually penetrate in there, but it protects it more, especially if you're doing maintenance and waxing it and things like that, and creating a protective layer on top of that already fine finish. So, but it's interesting to me, at least, that kind of the context at which people think about how the art form has progressed to where it's at is predicated on the lack of technology or the lack of materials that earlier knife makers had. And now that we have high stainless steels and complex heat treating processes and kilns and everything to achieve that stuff, the paradigm changes a little bit where you're like, I don't really need high gloss anymore because I can have a lower grit finish and still achieve the same kind of corrosion resistance using a stainless.
yeah, I don't know. I've always been drawn to the mirror finish. It's just what I started out doing and still do. But I mean, I think a well done hand rub finish is a work of art too. So uh, my wife recently at the Atlanta gun show, she come up to the table and she was carrying a 6 foot piece of some kind of carbon steel. I don't remember now what it was that she bought from Pops. And she said, I want kitchen knives. And they told me this was the best steel for kitchen knives. And I said, well, this will rust. And she said, that's all right. I'll take care of it. And I said, yeah, okay. So anyway, I built these knives for her and have these carbon blades and have stainless 416 stainless bolsters and beautiful handles on them. And some of the most rusted up stuff you ever seen in your life. And I just think, there's a lot of work I put into those knives, and I could have used stainless, and uh, the pieces I've made for with stainless stay just as sharp in the kitchen as what these things are doing. So, uh, yeah, it's just hard for me not to use stainless steel and mirror finish.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I it's one of those things where I think that there's a confirmation bias that people have with certain types of materials. Like, there's a more intrinsic value to a hand forged blade than a stock removed blade, or there's something that is better about this steel than that steel. And when I was talking with Laren Thomas about like the metallurgy side of things, he's kind of like, at a certain point, it really is splitting hairs, and it's really kind of getting a little bit persnickety about details. I mean, this is coming from a guy who is all about the
Right.
details. And he's like, at the end of the day, it really is kind of personal preference. There's some steels that are, mid carbons, there's high carbons, there's
Yeah.
cladding, there's super stainlesses, all those things, and it's all about kind of what you find to be the easiest and getting the results that you want. And there's a plethora of steels out there for you to accomplish all those things. So I never really get too hung up if somebody comes to me and says they want something out of S90V or some specific steel. I'm like, you know, MagnaCut is a perfect example. Like I like MagnaCut, but it is a bear to try to get a finish on. And if you're doing hand sanding and stuff, like you can spend a long time trying to achieve that same result that maybe with CPM 154 was not as hard. And that's one of those things where the buzzword of the steel or whatever, even though like I'll argue that there's like differences in some of these super steels and what they can achieve, it really is not so much different than like a well formulated, more readily available steel. It's at some point in time it really is just a personal preference more than it is a fundamental flaw in some alloy that you're choosing.
Yeah, I have one of the fillet knives that I made early on when I was using 440C, and my wife ended up with it in the kitchen, and I think it's by far the most used knife in there, and it holds up great. I mean, it holds up every bit as good as any of the other steels in there, and you know, it's really had a bad rep for a long time, but if it's ground right, heat treated right, I think it's going to make you a good blade. And people want to take care of things, but stuff happens, and that other steel just it looks really bad in a hurry. So
Yeah. Um, I've tried to like I don't have a lot of blades in the kitchen, and I have some handle material that my wife has talked about me making some knives out of. But something that I think about is how easy is it to make a blade that can like withstand the dishwasher and everything, and just normal kitchen use versus a really complex blade that you have to baby and apply oil to and sharpen with a whetstone and all those things, right? Like if people want to spend that time doing it, I think it's therapeutic, and it's like dusting and polishing the lint or the china or whatever. There's some people that like that ritual of taking care of things, but for me, if I find a blade that's like in the sink or in the dishwasher or whatever, I have to question the functionality of that thing, and I would prefer making a knife that can withstand those things. So it's I don't know that I'd spend all this time primping and taking care of a blade. I would prefer just to be able to do my normal thing and spend as little time having to worry about its upkeep as possible, so that way I can get to the things that I need it for, like fixing food and cutting packages and things like that.
yeah, there's a lot of acids in a lot of those foods that just attack it. Uh, well, I had one blade there that I had cleaned up for her and brought back in the house, and she started slicing strawberries with it, and it just started turning black. Uh, so there's I don't know how you prevent something like that. So I won't be using any more of it. I don't believe.
Yeah, what steel was it?
I think it was 5160 or something like that. I don't remember now. It's been it's been a while, and it was a real simple, steel. Wasn't anything real complex. I think she paid $9 for 6 foot of it, so it couldn't have been too expensive of stuff. But uh, yeah, I don't think we'll do any more of it. So,
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit, kind of pivoting from knives specifically, but we talked about photography, and I kind of want to delve into that a little bit. Like, what got you into photography? When did you start? And kind of like, what are your primary focuses in doing it?
my dad used to do a little bit of photography, mostly. portrait stuff and family stuff, but I just always have had this longing for the outdoors and the mountains, the mountain men, and that kind of stuff. And I used to think when I was younger I was a hunter and I wanted to hunt all the time. And I don't know, somewhere back in the late 70s, early 80s, me and a buddy shingled houses and make enough money to buy ourselves a camera. We were going to photograph wildlife, and so we bought a camera and bought a lens and uh, started realizing right quick that it's cheaper to hunt than it is to photograph. Uh, Buying a rifle and a scope, and as opposed to buying a camera and a telephoto lens and a tripod. Uh, it's not cheaper. But I really got interested in it, and we shot film for a long time, and kind of got discouraged, trying to sell a little bit of it, and uh, then digital came along, and it's just like it's fun again. And the new technology, they just keep coming up every year. They come out with just better and better. And my main focus has always been wildlife, and it's been mostly big game. I love going to Colorado to photograph elk during the fall when the rut's going on and they're bugling. And you know, I think when I was working for like 15 years in a row, we spent the last week of September, first week of October in the Tetons and then Yellowstone. And then since I've retired, we've been twice, I think, and just hadn't worked out to get back up there like when we were working. But we've went to Alaska and photographed grizzly bears, and uh, I went up into Washington State photographing bald eagles, and have a fifth wheel travel trailer, and we like to pull the trailer and go. And I think we're scheduled like the 29th of this month. We're going to go up the moose are to be starting to lose the velvet up in Colorado, and I think we're going to go spend a few days up there and try to photograph them. But yeah, it's been great. I mean, it's not very profitable. I sell a few photos along, but I very rarely make any serious money at it. But I just love it.
Yeah, I've actually when you go to your website, I've looked at on quite a few of your photographs, and I mean some of them are just incredible. I really like bighorn sheep and mountain goats. Bears and everything like that are interesting to me too. But some of these images that you've captured, I can't help but think about what it was like to actually be there and take them. Is a lot of this stuff done with telephoto, or do you get pretty close to your subject matter, or kind of like what does that look like when you're photographing?
I have a telephoto that's a 500 millimeter, which is roughly like about looking through a 10 power pair of binoculars. So, I don't have to be real close. Uh, you know, some of it I've shot from the cab of the truck, and some of it we get out and walk. But yeah, that's the neatest thing. I was talking to a guy that was doing paintings and everything, and I said, well, I said, that's really beautiful, but I got to be there. I got to stand there and see this with my own eyes. And that's one of the neat things about it. And then if you get a good photo and you get to share it and someone gets to see it that's never experienced anything like that, well, it's really neat. I enjoy it when people enjoy it.
Yeah, and that's one thing I wouldn't say the photography is like a dying art. People have people have access to pretty good cameras on their phone regularly, right? But there's like the subject matter that you're covering like the Uidad sheep. Like I can tell that the context at which you're seeing all of these game animals and things is pretty extraordinary. Like there's a pronghorn that's in a field of flowers, and all, I mean, some incredible examples of trophy animals in the hunting context. And in a lot of ways, I mean, I've been hunting for quite a many years now, and I've never seen a bunch of these animals in the wild like that, mostly because as a hunter, the context at which I can see those is limited by whether I have tags for them or whether they're in season or things like that. And so I might go, many years without actually ever being able to experience these animals. Whereas with photography, you're able to actually seek them out and wait and, capture them in a way that, most of life just doesn't really allow you to.
Yeah, the trick to a lot of that stuff is you have to go someplace where the animals aren't hunted. Uh, you go up to Estes Park, there's no hunting on the elk. They'll come out in the meadows and they'll bugle and they'll carry on, and there may be 1,000 people out there on the road watching them, and they don't care. You can go over to southern Colorado in areas where they are hunted and see a herd of elk out there 100 yards and pull over and stop, and you'll see a stampede for the timber. They will not tolerate it. And so a lot of the photography is they're wild, but they're habituated, I guess is the word. And the pronghorn around here are hunted like 1 week a year, 2 weeks a year. And so usually in the spring and stuff, they're pretty relaxed, but uh, late September, it's real hard to photograph them because they're actually hunted for a few weeks. But uh, yeah, that's the trick is knowing where to go. Uh,
Yeah. What has it been like to photograph antelope before and after the hemorrhagic fever came through?
I don't know exactly when that happened. We had a bad drought up here, and it got really tough to photograph them. And they're just now really coming back. And I haven't spent as much time trying to photograph antelope in the last few years, just because it got pretty hard to find them.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what year it started hitting, but you used to be able to out in West Texas area, especially and into lower New Mexico, find antelope all the time in humongous herds of like 1,000 antelope. But since the fever hit, it like I can't remember what the herd reduction was across the entire antelope species. It was like I don't know, like 70% or something. It was pretty devastating because I've been antelope hunting before up in Wyoming, and the numbers are starting to come back. But from other hunters that I've talked to who used to hunt them, you could pretty much find them anywhere, and now you still have to search. And there's a lot of areas where you can't hunt either because of landlocked BML land or whatever up there, or other political reasons. But it's apparently not anything like it was in the heyday where you can you just go anywhere and pretty much get your bag limit.
Yeah, Deb's family lives up in Washington State, so we used to drive up there, and we would go through Colorado and Wyoming up that way. And I've seen it where you just get sick of seeing them. There's just everywhere you look, there's antelope all the way up into Idaho. And then I've been up there on years when you could see them, and they were so poor that they, try to jump a barbed wire fence and couldn't get over it, uh, hang up on the fences and stuff, and just skin and bones because there was no grass that year, no rain. Uh, yeah, they have a tough life, and uh, I think that's what it is. I think it's just the evolution of it. They good years, bad years, and I think we're just kind of in a downturn right now.
Yeah, they are some hardy creatures too. I mean, not only do you have to work really hard to hunt them, but they're rugged.
Yeah.
One time, the only time I've gotten a ticket for speeding in another state was when I was driving up to I guess it was Montana for a buddy's wedding. And when I was driving back, I was trying to get into Casper, and a Reza police officer stopped me because I was like, I don't know, 20 some miles over the speed limit or something like that. And and he was like, he looked at me, he just shook his head. He's like, you can't do that here. And I was like, well, I understand that it's like against the law, but our conversation was basically that there's so many fatalities from people hitting pronghorn because they just like run across the road that
Yeah.
far it exceeds any normal traffic accident. And he's like, you can't do that here. Like you have to slow down. I think he gave me a little bit of a pass because we were wearing seatbelts and everything. But it
Yeah.
was the antelopes that like was kind of like the red flag. It wasn't just me speeding, but the likelihood that I would die if I hit one.
I've had them dart across the road on me up there in Wyoming, and I couldn't believe I didn't hit them. I don't know how in the world I missed them. But yeah, especially in September when they start chasing the does, uh, it gets crazy up there.
Yeah, well, that's back for where I'm from in Pennsylvania. I don't know a whole lot of people who have not had some accident as it relates to white-tailed deer. I think my
Yeah.
mom has totaled two cars. I have a sister that totaled a car. Everybody's hit them. I don't think I had, but I moved down here when I was 18. I didn't have enough driving time to hit
Hmm.
any, but there were some close calls, and because of all the mountains and everything around there, they'll jump off the mountainside, or they'll jump up from it, and you'll never see them coming. Like it's just you'll be
Yeah.
going through all these little switchbacks and everything in the hollers and whatnot, and you'll never see them before you hit them.
Yeah. You have to be careful up in Wyoming. There's things bigger than antelope up there, like buffalo, and they will get you. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's something that's interesting. I mean, I watch all these videos of people who like to try to pet the bison, and then end up getting tossed or whatever. And there was one of the most humbling experiences, not hunting up there, but being in Yellowstone and camping, is that in some of the campsites that you can go to in the Yellowstone area, the buffalo come real close to all the campsites and whatnot, looking for food and things.
Uh-huh.
And I had a tent out, and you could hear them brush by the tent at night. And I
Right.
woke up several times. I was like, I don't know about this because it's like the difference. Like, I mean, we could have got trampled real easily if they decided that they wanted to, but um, all these people that like to try to go and touch mama bear's cubs and pet bison and stuff like that, to me it seems a little bit disrespectful of the violence that they can they can put down on somebody.
Oh, I've got some pictures of a bull moose that came into Grovant campground there on the Grovant River there outside of Jackson Hole, and tore a tent up. Just I don't know what the tent did to make him mad, but he just got it hooked up in his antlers, and he just shredded that tent. And this was real early, like first light, and we were scared. The people were in it, and so everybody was trying to figure out what to do. And they said, "Well, don't worry." He said those people said it got too cold. They were going to go into town and stay in a motel that night, so there was no one in the tent. But he trashed that tent,
Yeah, well,
and
duly noted.
so they were just lucky that they got cold uh, and decided to go get a motel room. But yeah, a lot of that wildlife will come into the campgrounds because the wolves won't. Uh, they don't want to be around the people, and those big bull moose and cow moose and stuff. They've learned that, and so they'll come stay in the campground. And sometimes the hardest thing about photographing them is not getting a picnic table or a travel trailer in the background of the picture. Uh, I've seen some great big huge moose just come in and lay down and by a picnic table in a campground.
Yeah, have you ever I see that in some pictures that you have that there's like brown bears. Have you ever been up when the salmon has been running or whatever and fish for them actively?
We went up to Alaska one year and flew into Silver Salmon Creek, and it's just strictly a bear photography place. And photographed them catching the salmon, and I got photos of them coming running out, and they were just they almost looked at you like, oh no, not another photographer. They didn't care, and just paid us absolutely no attention whatsoever. And we had them one come within 20. I think the metadata on my camera showed he came within 26 feet, and just they couldn't care less about us. It was really a unique place, and they warned us when we got there. They said, "Now you're going to do things here that if you go into interior Alaska and try to do this, you're going to get hurt." But she said, "Here we can do it." And we had a little guy that didn't weigh 90 pounds soaking wet, and she chased one off with a lawn chair. So it's a unique place up there.
It's just a matter of we get to see parts of the country and flora and fauna and things like that that you just wouldn't be able to see if you just went on Route 20 everywhere, east to west, and if you just went the highway route. I really like that, and it's something that whether it's hunting or fishing or road tripping, those elements of nature and things that are tangible, like that you can see and you can experience yourself, that just to me means a lot more than like living in a digital or virtual reality type of world where everything that you get fed to you is from social media or whatever. And
Yeah.
and that's something that I think about a lot when I'm making knives, is like I get to make this thing that I get to feel, that I get to to touch and to develop a pattern out and everything, and I get to become very familiar with each one of the tools that goes into it. And that's a little bit different than like when I'm selling it to somebody. I'm really, that knife has a story because every single one followed a similar path to being made, but maybe I cut myself on one, or maybe like a belt exploded on one or something like that, or maybe I was going through this particular time in my life while I was making it. But that's something that you don't really get with production blades, is they got stamped out in the thousands or hundreds of thousands in a factory, and they were put together by somebody who you'll never know who their name was, and it loses the provenance and the spirit behind it, because it's just cranked out versus hand touched all the way
Yeah.
through the process.
Yeah, that's what Todd was telling me. He said people like to know the story of the knife, and they really like the story of the knife that almost killed you.
Isn't that a fact? Yeah.
One that you really suffered for.
Oh yeah.
So, uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I have, I don't know, there's not hardly days go by that I don't have another cut or scratch or something on my hands. And so when we take off on vacation and stuff, I get to heal up a little bit. But
Yeah. So, um, talk to me a little bit about your experience in the knife makers guild. So you're the vice president currently for the next 2 years, right? And is this the second term that you filled with the guild?
this will be my second term. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that was quite a surprise. I was voted in as a voting member, and then 15 minutes later, I was voted in as vice president. And so Wayne Hensley had been vice president for years, and he was suffering, had health issues and stuff, and so he had stepped down. And uh, yeah, we were sitting there in a meeting, and they were asking for nominations, and Bubba leaned over to me and he says, "Is it gonna piss you off if I nominate you?" And I said, "What?" He said, "I nominate Gary Langley." And I went, "What?" The next thing I knew, I had a second and a vote, and I was vice president. I'm like, wow.
Well,
So, and I didn't know what to think. The guild was such a big deal to me, and the history of it from back in the late 70s and 80s and stuff. I just ate all that up, and to be getting to be a member was just super great. And then suddenly being vice president, it scared me. And I thought, wow, I don't know if I can do this, And I thought about it for that night, and the next day I thought, let's just embrace this thing and try to make a difference. And it's been difficult in some ways trying to understand what the membership wants. We thought, they want this, and we try to give it to them, and we get crickets. We don't hear nothing, and we're like, wow, I thought this is what they wanted. And everybody's got an opinion, and everybody's opinion's a little bit different, and it's really kind of like herding chickens sometimes. Like what, I don't know what they want me to do, and I think knife makers as a whole are kind of a solitary bunch. They like to stay in their shop by themselves and do their work and everything, and so it's hard to get stuff out of them. What their expectation is and everything. And I mean, you get a group of 15 knife makers together, and you can't shut them up, but just uh, very limited. Well, we did the website. We had very limited participation. Uh, I don't know why, and we thought we were really doing something great for them, and that's the battle that we fight right now is trying to get people involved. But man, to me, it was just a great honor to. I mean, I knew D. Holder when he was vice president, and visited with him just on a rare occasion. But I just thought, man, it's just to be there with those guys and holding the title that they held. It's just really been something.
Yeah, and you just mentioned Wayne Hensley and Dee Holder recently passed both of them. Um, what's your sentiment been on these knife makers who are hold these positions and everything, getting up there in age and then passing away? I mean, do you you are now taking on that mantle of positions that they've held? Um, does it get lonely at all, being like the next senior person that's taking over those positions?
No, not really. I mean, for the most part, I thoroughly enjoy it. I mean, I've got relationships with a lot of super talented makers, and sometimes they call and suggest things. Sometimes they just call and visit, and if I had to been vice president, I think I would have never had that. And I just dearly love it when other makers call and we visit and talk like friends, And the scariest part for me is that not living up to the standards that the old guys set, and the whole thing is I think basically because the world has changed. I mean, in 1980 there was a Knife Makers Guild show, and if you were a guild member, you were in the show and you had a great show because of that. And now you've got Blade Show Atlanta, Blade Show Texas, Blade Show West. There's a knife show once a month somewhere, everywhere, and so it's kind of the world's just changed, and I don't know how we can adjust to it yet. That's the only pressure I feel is to try to figure out how to, in some ways, make us great again.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I think the one thing that I think about in the formative years of the guild is the objective was pretty clear, for leadership, right? It's because you had no avenue for selling knives, and you had to try to figure out a way to sell knives. So like, what are you going to do for all the members? Like, piggyback off of gun shows for a little while, try to build some literature and some paths for marketing, try to build up the numbers so that way it makes sense to have a show of your own, and then share the prestige with those knife makers, and boost everybody up. But in a world where that can be like a knife maker never has to even know who Lovelace was, or who Steve Johnson is, or
Right.
that the guild still exists, or they can go like entirely like online, and don't have to worry about marketing so much in that way. Um, it's hard to decide on like what does the guild do for the maker now, and why is it important for us to be part of a guild? Those are all like big question
Yeah.
marks, because there's no information that's really not available anymore. You don't have the exclusivity of a show. There's not an exceptional amount of marketing that an organization can do to make their members more prominent. So, what is it as like intrinsic to the guild that makes it the go-to? Like one thing that I was reading in the guild history that was actually very important, and it's talking to some of these older knife collectors, was the arbitration process. Like, you have these cats that were not really very honest about their business dealings, and so they collect their money, and then they would disappear for a while, and you never get your knife out of it. And the being a part of the guild automatically made the board arbitrators in making sure that a customer could leverage a complaint against a maker if they weren't following business practices. So some level of insurance against a purchase, and sometimes, quite a bit at the time. But anymore, it's like, you just get the credit card company to charge back on somebody or whatever. And arbitration has largely become a function of payment
Right.
processing instead of it being directly maker to maker. So,
Yeah. That's what we face is in a lot of ways it's just redefining ourselves. Uh, and for me personally, the history of it was enough for me to stay in. I just loved all that. Uh, a lot of people don't see it that way. Social media, the internet's changed everything. Uh, People can get online, they can follow a maker, they can see the knives, they can send him an instant message and say, "Yeah, I want that." I can send him a PayPal and he'll ship it to me, and they don't have to buy a plane ticket and fly to a show or pay an entry fee to get in the door, or motel rooms or expenses, none of that stuff, and they get the same quality knife. And if they do get burned by the maker, well, they can pretty much burn him right back on social media. So you can get a real bad rep in a hurry, and people find out about it. So yeah, in a lot of ways, a lot of the things that the original guild did for makers that you know we can't do anymore. I mean, it just doesn't exist. I mean, we still have the grievance process and everything the same as we always had, but fortunately, I haven't since I've been a member. We haven't had to use it, and I don't know. It's just the world's changed.
yeah. Well, I mean, that's one of the things that I think, for me, it's been valuable to understand the history of knives, because even in the last 100 years of knife making, there's not a lot of things that, like, from a knife making perspective, that haven't been like rethought of or redone. I wouldn't say that there's no original thought, because look at all of us in some ways, but like the shining stars of knife making, like Buster Wierensky, like some of the stuff that he did, like, we're going to argue like all of it, but it's just incredible. It's like to take his mind and to apply it to the vocation of knives, and then to see what his output was is like incredible.
Hmm.
And there's lots of knife makers like that, where I don't know what got some of these people in making knives from the rudiments of knife making to where they ended up. Like that evolution of personal aesthetic and artistry and everything to where we know them. Like even Steve Johnson, he pushed the envelope on fit and finish in a way that nobody else was in the Loveless style. And a lot of the techniques and things that we use today are because he helped to proliferate them
Yeah.
and to inspire other people. And you know, as much as like the selling portion of knives has changed because the economy and technology has changed, the philosophy of knives is still as deeply ingrained in the human condition as I think it ever was. We're talking about one of man's oldest tools, and where do you go from the very beginning of using tools to where we're at now, where you can effectively pick a knife up a lot of different places. But I want to understand that path. I want to understand.
Yeah.
Talking to you, like where do you come from when you make your knives, and what are you putting behind the blade to make it what it is? Because the business of things, I mean, we could talk about whether we sell knives or whether we don't sell knives, or steel types or uses or whatever, but those are things that they change so much. I mean, show to knife show, year to year, economic situation and strife to so on and so forth. It's like, what are each one of us, and what are we trying to do? And that's kind of the focus that I have. It's like I've kind of gotten past the idea of talking business so much, and mostly just talking about motivators. Because, like, I mean, what reason do you have to create something, and then why did you choose knives? Which I think is, was it, you seem to have a creative mind, like whether you're talking about how you're testing things in a laboratory for fuel, or whether you're a photographer, or whether you're in knives. It seems to be that you just have a deep desire for expression through physical means, right?
Mm-hmm.
And enjoying the experience of life. And to me, that's highly valuable for all of us to understand, is that your personal passion and your focus towards creating things instead of destroying them is kind of like what gets you to the place where you can make knives.
Yeah. I don't know. They've just always been part of my life, you uh, and the wildlife's part of my life, and just kind of do what I enjoy doing. Really, I guess is what it boils down to.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't say it any better. I mean, follow what interests you and see where it goes, right?
Yeah.
So, kind of on
Yeah.
that note, like as we wind down the interview process and everything, I'm interested to know, because you're a steward of learning, and you've been in the knife game so long, are there specific things that you would tell to a newer intermediate knife maker that you think might help them? Like, is there anything that you wished you would have known early on in making knives?
Well, there's just so much. There's so much I wished I'd have known. Uh, you know, I've told a lot of people, just just do it. There's nothing to be afraid of. Uh, if you're afraid that you're going to fail, maybe you don't need to start it. Uh, and if you the way to become a millionaire building knives is to start out a billionaire, and so it's not a real profitable deal. I know there's some people making a living at it, but it's never been that way for me, and it's never been about the money. Uh, but mostly, I just tell people just try it. I mean, uh, you're gonna make mistakes, and you're gonna learn from them, and then you go back and do it better next time, and just, just keep getting better at it. Uh, One thing I tell a lot of the new guys is, don't sell yourself short. Uh, I've had some pretty talented makers, and they were sitting there at the table and they had, $250 on their knife and it wasn't selling, and they were like, oh, should I mark it down to 150, and all this. And like, it's, I'm about 90% sure it's not about the money. It's about the right person hasn't walked up to the table yet. And so just don't sell yourself short. Don't panic. Uh,
Well, I think those are very valuable. I mean, I struggle with knife pricing too because you have lots of different camps of thought on pricing, and it's like if I made a knife at the same dollar figure that I made in my day job, I would outprice myself in the market. But when I'm making a knife, I really do value my time
yeah,
because I have a young girl that has a heart transplant and everything, and I'm considerate of the time that I can invest with her. We I have a stepdaughter that she just turned 18, so she kind of doesn't like any authority figures or anything like that, but we still try to spend time with her and everything. I enjoy spending time with my wife. I like doing things outside of trying to make money to pay the bills and trying to make a little bit of money in recoup for knives. But like my time is valuable. So it's really difficult, I think, to balance the selling yourself short with uh, being able to make knives just for the sake of paying your way through it. I know like there's lots of makers that have a bucket of funds that go into knives, and then they have their bucket of funds that they use for paying the bills and everything, and those don't commingle, right? So sometimes if you can't sell a knife, then you can't continue on expressing yourself through the knife medium because you don't
yeah.
want to double dip in your finance and everything. But um, it's really interesting. I don't know that there's a single answer for pricing one's knives that really makes sense.
There used to be a knife maker named Jack Crane out of Weatherford. He used to come to the Amarillo Gun Show. I used to visit with him quite a bit. And he told me one time, he said, yeah, he said, when I started full time, he said, there was a place down the street. I guess he lived on the edge of town. There was a place down the road there that had some berry bushes out on the side of the road. And said his wife would go down and in the fall and pick all the berries that she could pick. And then she would go down and buy sugar and she would make jelly. And then she would go to the day old bread store and buy the bread that they were throwing away. And they would have jelly sandwiches. And they ate jelly sandwiches until he finally got established enough as a maker to start making money. And he was telling me that at a time where I was young and still wondering if maybe I could do this instead of working at the refinery and all that. I thought, I couldn't do that. I couldn't go there, and just wasn't going to happen. And so uh, I guess it just depends on how bad you want to sacrifice for it and have your family sacrifice for it. But I think he did become fairly successful doing it. But big price to pay, if you ask me.
Yeah, I know. If I went out tomorrow and told my wife that I was quitting my day job and trying to make it as a full-time knife maker, I mean, she's very supportive, but she's also like smart enough to know that like I have a lot of passion, and sometimes sometimes I can get distracted. She's like, maybe just be a little bit more passionate about the thing that actually makes us money because we don't all want to be out in the street or eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches all the time.
Yeah. Well, you saying that about, valuing your time in your shop and the time you could be spending with your kids, but that time that you spend in the shop for yourself makes you better when you go in with them, I think. Uh, I think there's just a certain amount of that a guy needs, to be out there creating something or to be out there watching an elk or a moose or whatever. And just, I think a guy needs that to be better with his family. And so I don't think you should begrudge yourself that time. I think it's important for you too.
Oh yeah, I mean, it kind of gets a bad rap because in the newer generation, everybody talks about mental health, right? But but
Hmm.
being able to balance your life and to have an appropriate amount of sleep,
Yeah.
to have an appropriate amount of alone time to reflect and to build yourself up, and an appropriate amount of time for your family and work and everything are all like tenets that that if you can find those things and balance them out, that you become more effective in each one of the areas
Hmm.
of your life. Like, I mean, when you have everything sorted out with your family and you're not like fighting all the time and everything, you tend to sleep better. And and when
Yeah.
you don't have your spouse nagging at you because something's not done, and when you're not like sleep deprived, then your work is better. And if all things are fair and equal, your kids get to see the best side of you because the rest of you is not disheveled. And you get to focus on the things that matter. So, I mean, to me, there shouldn't be an aspect of knives that is so stressful that you start becoming dysfunctional in one of the other areas of your life that are more important. So it's all about finding out what
Yeah.
that balance is for you. And I think that that's actually a good point for knife makers. Is like it's very easy to throw yourself in and be obsessed, but the obsession quickly turns into dysfunction. And then if you right size yourself and like course correct, then sometimes knives is not like no longer the thing. And so you don't have a knife career and people don't collect your stuff because you're here today and gone tomorrow. Something that's important to be able to balance out is knowing what your limitations are and what you can or cannot accomplish, not overcommitting to people, not trying to win a quick buck and then be searching for the next adrenaline high or whatever. That the stability of the of knives is really in pushing your own art form instead of just looking first at what it can do for you monetarily, because again, we were I think we were talking before we decided to do the show and everything. You mentioned about Bruce Bump saying that it's like in this industry it's either feast or famine, and I think that that's true about any type of art form, because you're
Yeah.
you're you're either in a trend or you're not. But it is really that way. Like if you're not in a state of famine, then you're usually not creating. And if you don't take that opportunity when you're creating things to try to figure it all out, you're not going to see the feast or the opportunity for people to kind of pick up on what you're throwing down. And I do think that there needs to be an appropriate amount of focus with anybody on just taking time to yourself, figuring things out, and then being able to apply it. I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's photography or painting or pottery or woodworking or knives or whatever.
Hmm.
You got to be able to just sit and let things be and express
Yeah.
themselves to you.
Yeah. Balance is an important thing in all phases of life, really.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, I'm sure that you have other things to do, and I really appreciate you being able to spend time with us and share a little bit about yourself. It's been enlightening to me and empowering. And a parting words is at Blade Show, Texas. I brought Evelyn there, and she got to meet a bunch of people that I talk about or that she's seen online or whatever that I'll expose her to, and it tickled her pink that when we stopped by and said hi to you, that you had stickers and you gave those stickers to her. She was so excited, showing me those stickers that you collected and you gave to her.
Well, she's a dandy.
Yeah, well, I mean, but that's the thing is like that's the kind of person you are. Like that moment that you shared with her and encouraged her and shared those stickers with her is such an impression. And it's what keeps her involved in knives and being interested in what I'm doing. And then also like I get Blade magazine and I get like some publications and whatnot, and she will swoop in and grab my magazines so that way she can look at pictures and whatnot. And I don't know what her life will be in knives, but her passion is already ignited in that somewhat because I've exposed her and kind of indoctrinated her to that. But people like you feed that flame of interest and meeting her at her level. Spencer Applin, was talking to her about knives at Texas, and she gets to see all these people that want to include her. And, I want everybody to know that that's the kind of person that you are. I mean, I know that they get that through osmosis with the way that you live your life, but you mean a lot to our family.
I appreciate that. I enjoy y'all. I enjoy her and enjoy the visits we have. So it means a lot to me too.
Yeah, well, I mean, everybody's dad. I think that it's an appropriate title to the podcast because you are, I think, what everybody would hope to have in a parental figure, and I just it means a lot to me.
And you tell my kids that sometimes.
Hey, listen, it's my kids don't always love me, and in fact, I think maybe 50-50 split. But the thing is like as parents, our job when we're raising our kids is to provide an environment for them to act up, so that they know that there's a safe zone for them to experience life, but then also get the course correction that they need. So that way, when they go out into the world, they don't act like little jerks.
Yeah.
And then so what you see out of Evelyn is her not acting like a jerk because I did a good job raising her. And if your kids are that same way, it's because you got to be a little tough and kind of course correct with them.
Yeah. Well, my kids, I didn't know how it was going to be. They didn't come with an instruction manual. And I spent my time decided that I was going to be their parent and I'd be their friend later. And so that's kind of the way it was. And I wasn't always sure I was right. And then now, my youngest is 41 or 2, and my son's the oldest. And, we have a great relationship now. He comes up and goes photographing with me. And I mean, it's just great. We're friends now. And so I guess, I got lucky on that too. But yeah, you don't always know. Just do what you think's right. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the same in life as it is in knives, and you don't always know.
Yeah.
You just focus on what you think is right, and then let the environment and people and everything tell you whether that's something that they're picking up on. But again, Gary, it's a pleasure always, and you're more than welcome to be on the show anytime you want to.
I appreciate that.
All right, well, thank you again for coming and talking with us.
You bet. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Good Old Blades podcast. Remember that you are loved, and God bless.